lest they kick me out of the country and they send me back somewhere.
Yeah, you got to look sharp for deportation. You really do. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NUFC360 Football Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen. We're yet again absent a bald fraud, so I'm hosting today. With me today is Ryan and Bo. Boys, how are you both doing? Obviously, Bo with a fresh trim. How are you guys?
Feeling refreshed.
I'm a bit rocked. Another new host, another podcast. I think we've got more hosts than Newcastle have bloody goalkeeper, Stephen. So,
I mean, it does seem to be a competition in that regard, doesn't it? We'll start with the most recent game, obviously being us winning away at Southampton. I think there was a game that a lot of people, positive or otherwise, had a little bit of anxiety about, purely because of recent seasons having a poor away record, and just the fact that statistically they'd been the worst side in Premier League history up to this point. So it did seem like a bit of a banana peel after the 4-1 loss at home to Bournemouth. A 3-1 win away from home at St Mary's. Bo, start with you. What were your thoughts on the game as a whole?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously an important 3 points, especially after that crushing loss to Brentford. One of those things, or Bournemouth, sorry. One of those things where we were able to overcome another slow start. And that was probably going to be my biggest worry. Starting slow and trying to claw yourself back. And I don't know if you all felt this way, but after we went down 1-0, I kind of was like, okay, well, we should be fine. Worst side in Premier League history, most likely. And then once we kind of equalized shortly after, I was okay. So it was nice to kind of see. Didn't really feel like we got into second or third gear, even towards the end. But that's the only real glaring thing for me is another slow start. And you all know we can't do that against teams like Fulham, or else we'll get paid. We'll pay for it. So I'll take it. 3 points. We'll move on to this week.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the slow start, obviously conceding in the first 10 minutes to Jan Bednarek. Ryan, when we conceded from that, was pretty poor defending as well for the header. Were you concerned at all?
I think you're right. I think it was an exceptionally poor goal to concede. It was so easy for Bednarek. Like you said, bro, I think you're very valid in what you say, in the sense that as much as in the last couple of months, when the run that we've been on, we have started some games very well, actually. First half of the season, we had started a few games badly, and it seems sometimes that we also almost need to go 1-0 down to kind of kick ourselves into gear. Saw that against Bournemouth, and saw it again against Southampton. We came out, and I think, from the offer, I think it was clear that Newcastle were going to control the game, or at least have most of the ball for the majority of the game. However, like Bill says, I think one thing that, we did well again. We got our 2 goals within a very short succession of time, didn't we? I think it was 2 and 4 minutes. So within a bang, we were 2-1 up. It never really felt like the whole game we got out of that kind of first, second gear. And again, you could argue it was a professional performance and did what we needed to do. But I do think there were certain areas of the game where we were a little bit poor. So 1-0 down, you are a bit frustrated, and there was a good 10-minute period where you're thinking, is this going to be one of these days? You would hope not. And in the back of your head, you think, you are going to beat Southampton. But I think, until we got that penalty, didn't do an awful lot, really, did we? We had a couple of chances. We looked okay for the first 5 minutes, and then we conceded an exceptional poor goal, and it was always looking a little bit tricky from there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're right in saying that the bad start, it did seem like earlier on in the season that we needed that sort of that slap in the face with the goal that we conceded to Bednarek to sort of wake us up. Despite the rocky start, it was our second highest amount of XG created this season. But largely, it also does, we should mention, it does go to show just how poor Southampton can be defensively. Against Bournemouth, when we lost at home 4-1, we were as bad as Bournemouth were good. It wasn't just one team was overwhelmingly good and we were just average. We were good and Southampton were really bad at the back. The Sandro Tonali goal to sort of seal it was probably the best example of it. was it Harwood Bellis, I think, stepped out from the back line and just left a huge gaping hole for Tonali to run into. I mean, create 2.93 expected goals. That's the highest we've created this season outside of the 4-0 win against Leicester, which was 3.8. So, we did create a ton of chances. Opta had us creating 6 big chances in that game. 3 in the first half with 1.6 xg in the first half, and 3 in the second with 1.3 xg in the second half. So it was overall, underlying numbers, a relatively balanced attacking performance. And we did look, outside of that one goal we conceded, we did look pretty comfortable until there was that late on lifeline for Southampton when Mateus Fernandes managed to get in behind, just being offside a little bit, and then scoring what ended up being ruled out as a goal to make it 3-2, or what would have made it 3-2. There were some particular standouts, I think, in that game. I mean, the midfield again was pretty good for us. I mean, it does seem like Sandro, Tonali and Alexander Isak just seem to get better and better. We'll sort of split them up for the two of you to run the rule over. But Ryan, going to you first. But how good is Alexander Isak?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised a couple of interesting points there. Regarding Isak, I think, and again, there's always going to be this Newcastle bias. I don't think there's a better striker in world football than Alexander Isak right now, and I don't think that's unfair to say. I think he's playing in a team where he probably, I mean, maybe it's a bit unfair in Newcastle, but he does probably get the number of chances he would get at a team like an Arsenal or Manchester City, because at the end of the day, his finishing is as good as anyone in the world, because he is really good in front of goal. We had a couple of one-on-ones earlier on this season where maybe he's made a bit of a mess of it, but in terms of his composure and his finishing, I do generally think he's up there, and I think he's got everything you would want in a striker. He's got movement, he's got ability, he's got finishing, he's quick, but he's also tall. I think if there's only one thing I would really think he can improve his game, I think he could have a bit more of a physical presence at times, especially for his height. But I mean, he's playing in a team, and I think one thing we've seen from him is he's clearly been working with Howe on his link-up play, and because you start to see him, he's coming a lot deeper, but he's a good enough footballer to be able to affect games by coming deep, because he is a technically gifted footballer, and you can see that in his range of passing, actually, which is one of the major reasons I think why we've had a bit of an upturn in form, is because he's been a little bit more dynamic and he's actually been getting involved in the games more. Him coming a little bit deeper then opens up space for players like Murphy, Tonali's, that are actually coming forward and trying to get involved in the game. Again, you saw it with the goal that Tonali ended up scoring, is because Isak's dropped a little bit deeper and they've made that little exchange, and that gives Tonali the space to run in behind because the defenders don't want to lose Isak. So I think that was a bit of a long-winded answer, Stephen, like usual, but a massive player for us, and he's one that, for me, you just can't afford to lose. He's our most important player. In terms of how you replace him, you can't replace him. In terms of matching the quality for probably the quality of the player that Newcastle could realistically attract. I think, like I said, it's a privilege to watch him play at the minute, because he's just, everything he's doing is just turning to gold. And he's second, third top scorer in the league. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to say, he's the best striker we've had since Alan Shearer. He's the best all-round centre forward in the world, like you say, at the moment. I don't think there is any, the really elite goal scorers right now. You think Lewandowski, Kane, Haaland, and he's, Kane's really good at dropping deep and playing balls, but he doesn't have the dribbling or the ball carrying and whatnot. Isak is, I think, pretty clearly the most complete forward around. And you mentioned Arsenal. Something that sort of not frustrated or riled up the Newcastle fan base recently, or after the Southampton game, was Sky Sports' Mark McAdam out of nowhere bringing up the Isak to Arsenal link narrative again. And it spurred a number of comments and some frankly ridiculous claims about agendas at Sky Sports and whatnot. The Sky Sports own and friend of the show, Keith Downey, had to come out and make comments on publicly. Do you think it's a sign of just how good of a player we've got, that, other clubs, particularly Arsenal, seem so desperate to get him? And do you also think they're desperate for him to come in now, partly maybe because they're scared of other clubs becoming interested in him in the near future if he keeps playing the way that he is?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I think the Isak situation is an interesting one. I think it almost seems like he's a guy who scored 21 goals last season, but he never really picked up the level of traction that he's getting. It's all of a sudden, seems to be some form of switch that seems to have just flipped, and all of a sudden now he's kind of gone from that level where, okay, yeah, he was a good talent and Newcastle had a good player there, but he wasn't quite at that level yet and needed to develop, to all of a sudden he's now ready to walk into any team in the league type thing, right? Maybe bar Man City. So I think it's been interesting to see it unfold. Interesting as a Newcastle fan, because this is the type of stuff that, we've been calling out for ages, and you've got these guys that are now coming out here and saying, thinking they're ahead of the curve and Isak's the answer to all their problems. But again, Stephen, like you say, it just shows his levels, I guess, in terms of the types of clubs that, don't get me wrong, Arsenal are a big club, but I honestly think Isak is at the level where he could go on a level above Arsenal. The thing that worries me with Isak is, as much as clubs say, and again, this is me maybe being a little bit negative, is as much as you say, oh, you can't afford to get Isak, Isak probably got big aspirations as well. He's got a lot of ability, and I'm sure he wants to go and play at the top level of the game because he has the ability to go and do that. So whether it's at Arsenal or not, I do worry that there is going to be a coming moment in time where, if we're not progressing in the way that he feels we should be, that he might well knock on Eddie Howe's door and say, "Come on, you got to give me a chance here. You got to give me a move. I've given you guys 2-3 years of service, scored a lot of goals, and you'll get a good fee from me." So
I think better than a good fee. I think at this point, was it the number that everyone likes to throw around of around 150 million? That came from the Luke Edwards article in the Telegraph when it commented that Newcastle United reportedly wanted upwards of 150 million, and this was just after we'd beaten the likes of Ipswich and Leicester, and right. And then since that point, we've beaten multiple clubs away from home. We beat Tottenham, we beat Man United, who aren't having good seasons, but they're bigger names and they're bigger stages, regardless of how they're performing. And he's continued to be performing. He's continued to help, us put people away. And you'd have to think at this point, the fee would be even higher. You'd be getting close to or within touching distance of a world record fee for a guy that good, that red hot right now, especially to sell him when he's got well known that he's got 3.5 years left in his deal. I do think you're right, Ryan. I think if we don't progress, and I think that progression for us would be, at the very least, bare minimum, we'd have a good chance of keeping him if we get Europa League football. But realistically, a guy of his quality needs to be in the Champions League. He deserves, for how good he is, he deserves to be on the biggest stage possible. But then, like I mentioned, I do think, like you say, there will be bigger clubs in Arsenal as well coming in for him if he becomes available and he is in the Champions League. There's only so long that Robert Lewandowski can perform at the highest level at someone like Barcelona. Harry Kane will want to come back to Tottenham at some point. There will be clubs, Real Madrid as well, maybe PSG are getting rid of Randall Colomwani. Maybe they will want him. There's bigger clubs who will be winning trophies, who will be competing for bigger things than Arsenal, who are richer than Arsenal and bigger than Arsenal, who will want to come in for him eventually.
I think there is a couple of links to Arsenal, though. I think,
he's a fan and he loves Thierry Henry and everything.
I'm not saying Arsenal are not a big club, but I'm sure him and his agent have sat. There was rumours they want to sign a new contract with a release clause, similar to Bruno, which I understand you're protecting the player's best interests as an agent, but it's almost this indication of, I want the opportunity to make that move if the move becomes available. So I'm sure they probably sat down and had a think about this. And Stephen, like you say, probably strategically working out. You may well say, well, I might stay at Newcastle for another year because I feel there's an opportunity at Barcelona here in a couple of years when Lewandowski leaves or whatever. We don't know. We're speculating. Right now, we just got to appreciate what we've got, I think. Because I think, like you say, Stephen, I'm probably a little bit too young to really, really appreciate the Shearer. He's the best striker I've seen play for Newcastle by a long way. Yeah.
And considering other good players that we have at the moment, we're blessed with a coterie of international quality players. I mean, Bo, the other guy that we mentioned before we went off on one about Alexander Isak was Sandro Tonali, obviously scorer of the third goal, continues to just be an engine in the middle of the park for us. Seems to perform and seems to be, even in the game against Bournemouth, seemed to be one of the only guys on the pitch who was putting in a really good shift, or at least putting in a quality shift. Maybe not necessarily a comment about the effort being put in. How good do you think Tonali has been for us recently? And in your mind, do you think he can get much better? Do you think it can get the ceiling can get higher for him?
Yeah, I mean, he's been nothing short of amazing. If not that, depending on who you ask and depending on what his duties are. It really has been great to see, just because we've obviously Hal demands a lot from his players, and we know that, like they said, intensity is our identity for the longest time. But he is the pure embodiment of it. A lot of folks would consider Miggy to be that, where they're just running around all day, running like a chicken with their head cut off. But when you look at Tonali and when you look at the way he does it, it does look strategic. It's not just running for the sake of running. And it really is nice to see, especially when it's, the 85th minute or the 90th minute in extra time, and he's busting a gut to run up to press and kind of leading the line in terms of defensive duties. So I think, he is a top world class midfielder, and I think he's made everybody else, better around him. I'd say if you could want him to improve maybe a little bit, just add goals to the game. We've seen a couple more assists now, but I mean, Steven, correct me if I'm wrong, but that last goal this past week was his first in the Prem of the season.
It was his second, I guess. First of the season.
Yeah, first of the season. Yeah.
Villa on his debut. Yeah.
Okay. See. So I mean, hey, it's kind of you guys are gonna laugh when I make this comparison, but it's kind of like what we were saying about Sean Longstaff the last couple of years. It's like, hey, if he could just add goals to his game, he would be, somewhat respectful. But we've seen it with Tonali. He's got the physicality, his brain, and we've talked about this before. There are certain players where when they play, you can tell their brain is working a little bit faster than everybody else. And that was our biggest gripe for the longest with Jacob Murphy, is that, hey, like, it takes him a second longer. Him and Longstaff, it takes them a second longer to get that pass off, or to, look around and do what they have to do. But I can't talk about that man enough. At first I was a little hesitant, because obviously when he came back from the ban, he was a little slow to get back to things. But he's picked it up, and he's shown us why people consider him to be one of the best, or one of the better midfielders in the game.
You mentioned particularly the speed of processing, and that is very, very much evident when you see, particularly his first time passes. Right, when the ball comes to him, he can ping it out quickly without thinking, just taking one touch, and you see it a lot more with his interplay with Bruno. Obviously, you mentioned scoring more goals. Obviously, it's a bit more difficult for him to do that, being the deepest line midfielder, right? But obviously, he's got a threat from set piece situations. And he's seems to be getting better when it comes to his link up with other players. He seems happier to spray balls out wide and in behind a bit more. I love the guy. I think he's a phenomenal player. You can see why clubs back in Italy would love to have the opportunity to sign him and bring him back back to Italy. I think it was at Juventus were linked with him. And you can see why they would do it. Obviously, though, he's not going anywhere. I think he would be named number 2, maybe number 3, if you prefer Bruno, on the list of players you wouldn't sell over anyone else. Mm-hmm. But speaking of segueing really smoothly into players we have sold, we have finally made a bit of transfer business this window, albeit an outgoing one. Miguel Almiron has finally left after being rumored for what seems to be the entire window, and then months and months prior. He's going back to Atlanta United. I think it's the report is £11 million and that includes a £3 million set of add-ons. Don't know how achievable those are.
Well, let's hope they're not goal and assist related, Stephen. They'll never get achieved.
You never know. He score some goals in MLS, and it is a slightly different quality of league, but you never know. I don't think many of them will be worldy related add-ons though, and although he doesn't seem to score many of those anymore. Maybe just sort of open the floor to either of you who wants to mention, one, how good of a bit of business do you think it is after 6 years, getting about half of our money back on Miggy at 29? Is it 29 or is he 30 now? I can't quite remember.
He might
be. He is 30 now,
yeah, he's 30. Yeah, so a player's 30, getting half of our money back on him, and then just getting a guy off the books who clearly just wasn't quite pleased with his role in the team.
I mean, people question him as a player. I understand. I don't think you can deny that. He has had a successful period at Newcastle. I don't think there's many, fans who would look back and say he's been a poor signing for Newcastle. I think, like you say, Stephen, I think it's a good fee that we got for him, actually. And I think you had to sell him. Yes, you might leave yourself a little bit open in depth on the right-hand side, but getting half of what you paid for him 6 years ago back, considering if you look at his goals and assists and his output, which ultimately is what wingers are judged on these days, I think it's a good bit of business for the club. I think his time came. He's not been playing much this season. Whether the desires was really there, at this point, I think he's probably happy with the move. It's a chance for him to get closer back to South America, closer to his family, in a place he knows well, and a place he knows, he's played before. Wish him all the best. And, he has given us some great moments. That goal against PSG, that will always be one of the most, iconic moments of recent Newcastle times. People forget, the game against Sunderland, for example, as well, last year, where one of his best games in a Newcastle shirt. His energy, his press, and he did give us a lot of good moments in a Newcastle shirt. So as frustrating as he was, I think he deserves a lot of credit. Much rather have a player like Miguel Almiron, who at least gives his all to the team, than an overinflated ego who thinks he's better than what he is. And we've seen plenty of those in and out the doors at Newcastle throughout the past. So, all the best to Miggy. I was actually quite sad watching the little tribute video the club put out. I think it was a nice touch. He's clearly a well-liked guy within the dressing room, and you wish him all the best. And I hope in some way, shape, or form, a bit like you've seen with Jonas and stuff like that, that he does get to come back to the club one day, get a proper send off, and remain a part of the club, and because ultimately he's given a good portion of his career to the club, and he deserves that respect.
Yeah, 6 years. I mean, he's only made 6 appearances this season, obviously, which ties into what you said about not making many appearances this season. And I think you're right. But I think no one will look back and say he was a bad signing or a bad player. I think people sort of undervalue or seem to forget how good he was at times under Rafa. There was stretches of seasons where he wasn't getting goals and assists, like we know, but he wasn't as frustrating as he became when he was moved out to the right wing. I think when he was often playing sort of more narrowly and just off of the likes of Rondon or and whatnot when Rafa was around, it did look like there was a different role for him in the team, and he looked like he could really play well. I mean, notably before he joined us in Atlanta, his role in MLS was sitting behind in a sort of 10 in the 10 role as a second striker behind Josef Martinez, and he played really well there. And because he's so one-footed, having him more central meant that he could go in different ways and play differently. And it does seem like the way we've developed as a team, it just sort of left him behind a little bit. And his effort has always been very respected. I think one of the things that everyone always prefaces a comment about Almiron up with is, oh well, he's going to work well. We love him for the work rate, but then it's something else. It's another comment about being a frustrating player. And having just that, not quite being at the level we need to be now as a team. And I think it is fair that he gets a really loving send off, because he's worked, like you say, he's worked bloody hard. A well liked player, he's beloved in the team, and I think the team will miss him. I think you always sort of miss those types of players when they're gone. The guys who come off the bench and will just run forever and just give everything. Sort of moving on from transfers, because it gets the longer we spend on it, the more miserable it will become. The next game we got coming up, obviously after our 3-1 win over Southampton, we have Fulham. This sort of 4-game run of very winnable games in the Premier League. It's now maybe before we lost to Bournemouth, that was the case. At home in 2 days' time, as of recording on Saturday. 3 o'clock kickoff. Bo, come to you first. What are your sort of expectations for that game? How do you think we'll do? Do you think Fulham are particularly threatening at this point in time? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's Fulham's going to be a tough one. It makes me feel better that we're at home. And we saw last week how they played Man United and lost in the last 15, 20 minutes, I think it was. I would expect to get points here. We should, if we play the way we're supposed to. Well, 3 points should not be out of the question. If we start slow, I'll be a little worried, mainly just because they've got a very physical midfield, and also Adama Traore will run circles around you if you let him. He probably won't be able to hit the target at all, but being that fast is always a worry. I think Harry Wilson is out, so I think that's a plus in my opinion. But obviously, they have Emile Smith Rowe, who will be just as dangerous. So we'll see. I do feel confident, but I would say 3 points should be what you're aiming for.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of that. I mean, Ryan, coming to you for your sort of opinion on it as well. Now, I mean, Fulham at the moment have, I think they're by underlying numbers, the 8th best team in the league. And they got the 4th best defense in terms of expected goals against, but they are, I believe, 12th or 13th in terms of attacking underlying numbers. How are what are your feelings on the game on Saturday?
I think it's a huge game, and I know I come on here and say that every week, but if you actually look at our fixtures ahead, we have got quite a tough run coming up. We've got Man City, Forest, Liverpool coming up, so you're playing 3 of the top 4 after this, as it stands, and after the games preceding this Fulham game. So I think it is a big game. I do think we do need to win this game, because I think we are going to drop points ultimately going away to City and going away to Anfield. And if we want to keep up the pace and we want to be in those conversations for sniffing around top 4, top 5, you've got to win these games at home. I like Fulham a lot. I think they're a good side. I really like Marco Silva. I think he's a good manager. And I think they've played some good stuff this season, and I think they've dealt really well with some of the departures that they've had in recent years. Your Paulinhas and your Mitrovics, who are big players and have been big players, especially Paulinho, who's an excellent player, I think. And to be able to seamlessly, replace him, but also add an extra dimension to their game in the sense of bringing in a player like Smith Rowe, I think it makes them a dangerous side. They're dangerous on the break. They can be, at least, like you say, Bo, with the pace, and they're typically a tough team to beat. They don't tend to roll over too easily for teams, and I think we will need to be definitely better than what we were in the last couple of games if we are going to beat Fulham. I see it being a pretty tight game, to be honest, Stephen. And again, I think one area where I thought we were actually quite poor against Southampton was the midfield. I know you said Tonali had a good game. I thought Bruno and Joe Linton, for example, were off the pace. And I think it's going to be a key battle for us. We need to win that midfield battle. And yeah, we are on paper, we have got one of the best midfields in the Prem, but in the last couple of games where we've looked a little bit exposed in the middle, actually. And I think it's going to be a tough battle for us. I think it's going to be a tough 90 minutes.
I do wonder whether the break that we've had, obviously, after Bournemouth, when we just looked second best in every regard, we had a week, and then it was the Southampton game, and then we've had a week again, and then we've got Fulham. I'm hoping that that sort of legginess, that sort of lack of sharpness will maybe be ironed out, having had maybe a couple more days of rest than they've had in the weeks prior.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you mentioned that they're a good side. We have the 5th best defense by underlying numbers in the league this season. Liverpool, Arsenal, and Forest make up the top 3, but then Fulham are ahead of us. They've got a really stingy defense as well. The thing that separates us is in the last sort of 2 months, we've scored a lot more goals than they have, and I think that's going to be the key battle for me. I mean, you mentioned the midfield. I think that will be very important. I think for us, it's going to be how clinical can we be when we get chances. I think we will create some chances, and it just comes down to whether or not, if Isak is as sharp as he has been, I think we can score a couple goals.
No, I agree. I think having on a day, especially playing at home, we will make chances. And it's about being profitable with those chances. And I think, again, one of the things I think we're particularly fragile, and I think the last couple of games defensively, especially against Bournemouth, and I think they have got threats. They've got, Anthony Robinson, for example. And I don't want to overanalyze every single Fulham player that they've got.
Yeah.
We're a better side on paper, and I would hope we would win the game.
I'll come to you first. Just a brief, can we win? Should we win? And what would your score prediction be?
Yes. I'm going to go 2-1.
2-1. Okay, go and win. 2-1 win. Yeah, okay, win. Ryan, what about you?
I think we should win, and we can win. And I think, basically yes to both your questions. Score itself is a tough one to call, I think. I do think it'll be a tight game. I think if a team wins it, it'll be by 1 goal. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a draw. It kind of screams a draw to me, in all honesty. But I think I'll go. Yeah, I kind of agree with Bo, actually. I think I'll go 2-1 Newcastle.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I mean, when you sort of suggest that it does sort of scream draw, I think both teams are playing with a couple weaknesses at the moment, but both teams can also score goals. I think it will probably be a 2-2 draw. I don't think it'll be a 0-0 because I think both defenses can be got at the moment. And I don't think either team is playing their absolute best. But yeah, I think a 2-2 draw. I think we can win it, and if we do, it'll come down, like you mentioned, Ryan, to the midfield having a good game.
I do have that as well. I think. I mean, you've got to also consider, and just for you, Stephen, but we've also got Arsenal. Obviously midweek, massive game. Will be our biggest game of the season to date. Are you worrying, or could there be a slight complacency, or one eye ahead looking at that game and not thinking, and almost not giving this game the approach that maybe it perhaps should merit? Is there a worry from your side that we might look at that? Like that?
Not really. I don't think so. I mean, I think you look back at the last semi-final we were in when we were up against Southampton. Obviously, different caliber of opponent, but we went into those games. We didn't really drop our levels too much in those games. I think it's 4 days after Fulham we play Arsenal. I think that's enough time to rest the players and also prepare them. I think Eddie Howe's not the type to let us lower our standards. I think they've learned from the emotion of the cup run a couple of years ago. So no, I don't really have any concerns about the Arsenal game. But we can talk about that another day as to whether or not we have what it takes to see out our generous lead at the moment in that tie. But other than that, thank you both for joining me, and thank you everyone else for watching at home. I mean, give us if you like the content, give us a like, a comment, and a subscribe, and let us know down in the comments down below what you think the score will be against Fulham, and answer Ryan's question. Do you have any concerns about the time between that game and the Arsenal game, and whether or not you think that will cause us any problems? But other than that, Ryan, thank you very much for joining me. And to everyone else, we will see you next time.